stick to cocktails for one. Now he's just another lonely businessman, sitting in a lonely business land. His story's on every jukebox, and his life like he's drinking is on the rocks. Yeah, his life like he's drinking is on the rocks. Hey, he never done too good when he was in high school. Oh, he never even talked to a popular girl. Yeah, he just hung around down at the drive-in,
No está funcionando.
honking on his horn and drinking pearl beer, but he's future farmer of America.
Yo creo que sí. Bueno, voy a intentar. No, lo puedo hacer, pero sí.
Future father of some president who'll be another pain in the ass for the US of A. He'll be another pain in the ass for the US of A. Well, I drove down to the drive-in, and I drove in. I said, "Car for the coat." Said, "Let's go for a little spin." She said, "I'm losing you, boy, losing you. Somewhere between them burgers and the malt." I said, "If you won't pass your pepper sugar, then I don't want none of your salt." And I drove off. Yeah, I drove down to the main drag, smack in the middle of town. Turned on the radio, top down. I was cruising out across Broadway, dragging the damn main. And just seen that DJ on the radio said, "Pink and black, she's coming back to you." And I drove in. And when I turned up that radio, this is what I heard. Ever need somebody to love you? Ever need somebody to care? Stick your finger up in the air. Baby, I'll be there. 'Cause pink and black is coming back. 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 It's coming back. Coming back and me. Pink and black, pink and black, pink and black, coming back. And if you ever need to boogie woogie, if you ever need to dirty bop, bop, well, baby, don't stop, bop, 'cause I'll be dancing there too.
Hey, Brooke, Noam, and Megan, can you accept people coming in? I'm gonna, because when I share the screen, or when I put it on the PowerPoint, I can't get back to Zoom, unfortunately. So if you can just admit people for a bit, I appreciate it. All right. Thanks.
If you ever need some Barbie socks, well, maybe don't leave the house. Just stay on top and bottom like we did in school. We both were cool. 'Cause pink and black is coming back. 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 It's coming back. Coming back. And me. Pink and black. Pink and black coming back. So come with me to 53. We'll bring back all of our used to be. Pink and black, she is coming back for you and me. She was a honky tonker, and he was a family man. And she showed him the gold teeth when he'd hold her little hand. And met out on the highway at the Paradise Motel now. On Saturday nights when things weren't right between him and his wife in town. And then just another couple on a high plains jamboree, playing out them songs they understand. Yeah, just another couple making jukebox memories. Walking into troubles hand in hand. And she weren't no maid of cotton, and he weren't no hell of a man, but they must have loved each other like only the lonely can. 'Cause they slow danced through the neons like sorrow through a song. Then carried the tune to the motel room and they played all night long. And just another couple on a high plains jamboree, playing out them sad songs they understand.
Hi, Curtis.
Hey, Jackie. I just realized that I wasn't sharing my screen, so you were just watching.
Hey, can you hear me, Curtis?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, good, because I've never done this without headphones, but I don't want to hold something, so.
No, you're fine.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
So there are 13 people, Curtis?
13 people.
Are there 13?
Well, there may be more, but there are also people who may watch on YouTube.
Okay. Did you want us to admit people or no? Because I don't know how.
I've got that set up. I've got it set
Yeah?
up. So
Okay.
yeah, no worries. No worries.
All right.
Noam, have you ever heard of this singer?
No, new to me.
His name's Terry Allen. He's a local guy, and he just Terry Allen and Joe Harvey Allen are from Lubbock. They've been out in the world, artists, singers, actors, and they've or Texas Tech has acquired their archives and their works. Right? So they're quite a team. If you get a chance, just look him up. And, some albums that he's got about West Texas and Lubbock in particular.
How do you spell those names again?
RRYALLEN. Did you see the movie? I mean, it's been a long time, but David Byrne did a movie about Texas called, I think it was True Stories. No, I mean that's one you've got to see. It's the David Byrne show, and that Joe Harvey is in. John Goodman. Really good music. I think we can wait a little bit more, maybe a few minutes, and then we'll get started. Sound good? Leaders?
Curtis, I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to share during my reading. That shouldn't be a problem, right?
No, you should be able to do that just fine. Yeah, I mean, in particular, because you're, in the, you're a co-host as well. But I think anyone can probably share, which I probably shouldn't be broadcasting.
But I have the share screen function lit up, so it seems like it'll be fine.
Yeah, you should. I don't know. when I've got my PowerPoint set up, I can't read I can't move my mouse around on the screen. So I don't know what's in the chat.
Yeah, the coal mighty Nashville, Music City, USA. They call it God Almighty Nashville, Music City, USA. Oh, but get out of the city where the farmer plays. You're in the real music country that them city ways. Get with the flatland farmer, flat picks, no guitar. Give me the flatland farmer, flat picks, no guitar. Yeah, close you want to any music road. He's the long dirt furrow where the cotton grow. Give me the flatland farmer who flat picks and no guitar. Give me the flatland farmer who flat picks and no guitar. He don't make no money. Oh, but I tell you that boy can out sing, out pick, out play, out drink, out pray, and out lay any of them Nashville stars.
What do you think? Should we get started? Let me see one other thing here. Just need to make sure that I'm.
I think so.
Yeah, I think we should. We need to get back there. Yeah. All right. There we are. Okay, well, buenas noches. Bienvenidos al otoño del 2020 y al Texas Tech, donde tenemos la suerte de ser una institución multicultural and multilingual. Además, somos un Hispanic serving institution. My name is Curtis Bauer, and I'm the director of the Creative Writing Program at TTU, and it's my honor to welcome you on behalf of the Creative Writing Program in the Department of English. On this eve of the announcement of the latest winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature, Louise Glück, as you can see here on your screen, I thought it would be appropriate to share some poems by Nobel Prize winners, but in particular, women. And I thought I'd read a brief poem by the last woman poet to win this award in 1996, the Polish poet Wisława Szymborska, and this is translated by Barancik and Kavanaugh. The three oddest words. When I pronounce the word future, the first syllable already belongs to the past. When I pronounce the word silent, I destroy it. When I pronounce the word nothing, I make something no non-being can hold. I think this is, it's such a wonderful, wonderful thing that a poet is winning the Nobel Prize and that we have poetry in the world. So before we begin, however, I'd like to make a few announcements and requests. I think it's important to share tonight that we believe Black Lives Matter. We believe no human is illegal. We believe women's rights are human rights. Science is real. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Please know that we as faculty and a community at Texas Tech work to make every space a safe space, and that we are here to support you, every one of you. I hope that tonight we can give our readers our undivided attention, and we can do so by muting ourselves when you come in. And I encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat area, and we'll try to get to them at the end of the reading. Our upcoming events include next Thursday at this time, there's going to be a Humanities Center event about the Pisgah National Forest. It's in a web exhibition, as well as a conversation between three members of the forest team. And then also be on the lookout for an announcement about a reading and or a conversation by Naomi Jackson and Danielle Evans. So tonight's reading serves multiple purposes. It serves as an excuse to gather as a community and share something good in a time when so much seems to be negative, and listen to new work by our faculty and graduate student writers. And it is our way to welcome and celebrate the newest addition to our faculty, Dr. Noam Doer. Each writer will read for approximately 15 minutes, after which I will come back and introduce the next reader. And tonight, we're going to begin with Dr. Kolosov. And let me just make sure that, yeah, we're in our speaker mode here. Jacqueline Kolosov has published 3 books of poetry. Her 4th, Prevail, is forthcoming from Salmon Poetry in late 2021. She's been awarded an NEA Literature Fellowship in prose and has published several novels for teens. 7 of her essays have been notables with essays, stories, as well as craft pieces, having appeared in journals such as The Moth, The Swanee Review, Bellevue Literary Review, The Writer's Chronicle, and Terrain.org. The co-editor of 3 anthologies. The most recent is Family Resemblance, an anthology and investigation of 8 hybrid literary genres. Jackie, please take it over.
Thank you very much, Curtis. I'm going to set my timer so that I don't go over. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, and thank you all for coming tonight. It's really a pleasure to read on the day that Louise Gluck gets the Nobel Prize, and the evening after, we have a very significant fly who sat on someone's head for 2 minutes. I'm sure that'll be in lots of art in the future. But in any event, I wanted to actually start with another poem as well, or at least a fragment of another poem. I'm about to move from my 3 acres. I live on 3 acres right now with trees, which is unusual. And this evening, for the very first time in 2 years, I saw the owl that lives on my property. And I have, it was magical because that owl was about 10 feet away from me, just above my head, and looked at me. At least I want to think that owl looked at me. And at the same time, I've been reviewing or reading, in order to review, Stanley Plumley's posthumously published collection, Middle Distance. And so I'm going to have to hold it up here. So I really admire him. And I somehow felt that this was some kind of sign. So I'm going to read a section from his poem, Winter Evening, after which all of the things that I read by myself, my own work, will probably seem rather not as good. Winter Evening. Someone asked me earlier today about how the past is people, which I took to mean a memory, a question that had more to do with why we remember, who we remember, right down to the coloration in an eye. Children cover their eyes in order to become invisible, as later they disappear into their eyes, the way sunlight leaves and enters and within the imagination takes on meaning. Say blue in all its variety and depth, which, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder, though I wonder. So that's just a part of the poem. Okay, so on the way in which June differs from August. Oh, and there are 2 lines in the poem from Martin Buber, and those lines are, all real living is meeting, and prayer is not in time, but time in prayer. June is daylight's furthest reach. August, a wearied sentinel following the sun, or the shadows of our bare-skinned children lengthening on the lawn. June's the seedlings becoming, such deep marrow pleasure in the first squash, eggplant, and now the tomatoes are putting forth stars. August is watermelon giving way to apples, afternoon's humid sleep, and June, the child's plunge into the chlorinated blue, each ripple as supple as this evening's primrose. Your hand in mine, our footsteps oh so quiet on the path. August's the minds leap across 60-some tomorrows, each one chanted in the jump rope's 1-2 rhythm of sticky cheeks and fingers, knees skinned, grass stained, dusted with sidewalk chalk. All real living is meeting, and prayer is not in time, but time in prayer. The hands becoming steeples, trees, towers for containing echoes, the mountain that remembers the pilgrim's journey along the path. Yes, time's hands are vessels, hallowing the butterfly's wing, but also the moth's. Okay, the next one is North Atlantic right whale. And 2 summers ago, I had the real privilege of staying in a house in the Hamptons, close to the tip of the Hamptons, and a small house, unlike most of the houses. And I would walk in the evenings along the shore, along the ocean. And I never saw a whale, I saw many dolphins, but I did a lot of reading about whales. And the North Atlantic right whale is highly, well, endangered. So, and I actually forget the form that I wrote in at the time, but anyway, I should have looked it up. In death they float, and so became known as the right whale. Escalating now, they're vanishing. By day, the remaining few brave nets, ships. The eyes, Ahab said, define the face of man. What of a whale's eyes? Don't their eyes capture the light too? These great beings known, if at all, as almost infinite depths are known. Today, right whales number 300. When their eyes close, 2 portals remain open. How we see, we know, but how little, how very little is it that we understand? So that last word is supposed to be no, but I had to leave that no, go away. All right, so lunar eclipse. And so this is the lunar eclipse that was at the end of 2019 to 2020. And one of the things that I love about being out here is are all the birds. And those of you new to Texas, the thing that you have, one thing to be excited about is the most birds migrate through the state of Texas than any other state in the country, as far as I know. So, foraging just beneath the mulberry, a lone junco, charcoal silted gray as the moon's penumbral shadow. Glacial, this 4 a.m. light, and silent as the land before dawn. In the paddock, 2 horses, prick ears tipped with snow, stepping forth to greet me with synchronized knickers and one long baritone neigh. The gelding nuzzles my arm and I break the scrim of ice, place fresh hay on red ground. Irrational perhaps, this feeling, time has no purchase here. In this moon-white, intensely bright bower, the junco now joined by mourning doves, a dozen sparrows, and his own dapper kind. Every now and again, several will break into a cheery, chipping chatter. Foraging alongside a dozy dove, the juncos become a club of charcoal-vested philosophers, sifting through the day's concerns until all at once off they rush, only to return as if hardly prepared to surrender the stage and go on. Okay. All right, so I'm going to read a poem or two from Memory of Blue, which was my last collection. And there's a photograph of Mont Saint Michel on the cover. And oh, I don't know. That's what the cover is, but I can't show it to you right now. The poem I'm going to read is Rain's Offering. Rain is not the soft, sighing voice of memory. It does not seek again the child, neither her first hesitant steps, nor her backward glance and wave, the morning she walked down the lane for the first day of school. Rain is not tea, steeped in the silence of an English country house, a hound drowsing beside the fire, the petals of a rose falling onto glass. It cannot chase away the shadows, sorry. Hush, Archie. It cannot chase away the shadows, meandering beneath the birches, nor startle a spider in her web. And despite the occasional sun shower, rain remains unfamiliar with the heat that ripens the sunflower, freckles a child's bare arm. Rain's fingertip cannot divine the anemone's eyelet heart, nor catch the pulse of galaxies along a starling's wing. Rain is a wild-throated thing that empties itself in the open meadow, washing away only to reimagine who and what we are. Okay, so that little puppy will not be singing along when others are reading. I will mute myself. But I will point out that when years ago I had the honor to share the stage, I was the backup for Leon Lee, and my daughter was a baby at the time. And he had no problem with that baby being right on the stage with him, ready to risk that baby crying, screaming, burping, whatever. All right, so I wanted to resist the impulse to read the majority of the poems from Prevail because they're graver. And my mother asked me today, how have your poems changed? And I was trying to tell her, but when she's 86, I'm not sure I want to tell her too much about this. So the last poem I'm going to read probably is called Hush. Well, no, I think I have time to read two. Hush. And the epigraph is from Dickinson, "Nothing is the force which renovates the world." So that quote that mentioned from Szymborska about nothing and silence is really incredibly beautiful and true. Nothing is the force which renovates the world, but then it becomes something, right? This mare who abides within, she is sculptural fleet. This mare of ebony mane and tail, whose brow bears a white star, the kind a child's hand might make, one white streak in a body resembling night. This mare is the pasture's stillness, whose eye contains the depths of Baltic amber, gold thread of iris, thorn, crown, tears. The wind may gust, and here on the high plains it does gust, as it gusts in Damascus and Aleppo, though I wonder about the silence there. Why can we not remember the feathered fall of angels, the way the desert remembers the history of wind? In ancient times, keening gave shape to grief, Bodies swayed and rocked. Tell me, Mare of the White Star, tale like the quill with which God wrote his book into being. Is he still writing it now? So many children, wolf-eyed, hungry, have ceased to speak while poppies bloom through the bones of the dead. You, O Mare, can withstand wind sharp as shards. Help us, I beg you, to remember our names. Okay, so last one is called tea. T-E-A, tea. Great drink. Should the tea be sencha, each sip as nuanced as grass calligraphy, or earthy bancha, picked and common as the cupboard's chipped cups? My grandmother drank Russian caravan steeped in a samovar, her cup a glass window overlooking the St. Petersburg winters she'd known as a child. What about a tisane of white egrets floating pearls? With infinity's books opened before him, C.S. Lewis preferred to take his tea alone. Fielding relished his with a lump of scandal. I'm one for whom the kettle's whistle becomes a threshold into the unknown. So let us begin with musky Darjeeling. I've always longed to visit Bengal, and as they say, each cup's an imaginary voyage. Or perhaps we should give Assam a try, its malted mystery allied with floodplain and monsoon. We'll drink it reverently, as if each cup held the axis on which the earth revolves. There's time yet for those hundreds of things. The shadows gathering on the lawn remind us the hours pass too quickly. Was it last month or only yesterday we first walked our daughters off to school? And did I tell you my father will be 80 on the 10th? Yes, yes, ours is a moth's hour. But come, let's put the kettle on. Even in the midst of these years, that old copper pot will continue to sing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. That was great. Our next reader is Brooke McClurg. He received a BA in creative writing from Columbia University in fiction and an MFA from Rutgers University, Camden in nonfiction. Originally from Southern California, he's currently pursuing his PhD here, and where his research interests focus on hybrid nonfiction, lyric narratives, Latinx literature, and translation. His work has appeared in Exposition Review, Pigeonholes, Heartwood Literary Magazine, as well as others. Please welcome Brooke McClurg.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, great.
All right, okay. Thanks. I'm going to start with some shorter ones. I'm going to read some nonfiction tonight. This first one's called Joyride. It's afternoon, late summer, and the sun is pouring over the metal of our family lane. A lime green Mustang, such that the waves of steam off the tin can top can nearly be grasped. Inside, the dashboard too radiates. I stand in the middle of the front bench seat, the sweaty skin of my bare back repeatedly sealed and peeled from the vinyl, flanked by my older cousins, 13-year-old Irma, who's driving, and 11-year-old Margie, the passenger. We barrel past hundreds of carports over the molten blacktop alley of our oversized apartment complex. My barely older brother is in the back with his nose smudged against the smaller rear window, bouncing up and down each time we hit a speed bump, but I'm jumping too much to notice, laughing. And as the car approaches the walkway between buildings nearest our apartment, the girls glimpse my mother standing in a rose-covered white hippie dress, unexpectedly home from work, where I always recall her. She grimaces in the car's direction as it approaches her cross-armed stance. In panic, the girls release out a long and slow but audible shit, then lower their heads in an attempt to reverse what has already been seen. The car passes at 20 miles per hour, seemingly with no driver, just my bouncing, ecstatic face up and down and up with hand waving and lost in the drooping yellow headliner, and my brother's squished nose as he wide-eyed recognizes her and turns to wave through the rear window as we pass. This one's called The Ride is the Line Itself. Spring meant nothing in drought-stricken Southern California. Seasons passed unnoticed. Look left, right, wait for the tourists to change. We ran kissing each other, them, hanging out of jeeps and lowriders, flying the riverbed past curfew. The electricity of skin-on sunburned skin begging for eucalyptus relief and a fingertips graze. Tousled hair and chapped lips, soothed by the moisture of strangers. Every relationship lasted the theme park length of a line. Easter sweltered, the chocolate eggs and jelly beans melting into the lawn before they could be collected. April showers came brief, if at all. June gloom burned off by noon, but only locals knew started in May. The spirit-dampening marine layer was but a half-day sentence. The beach still, just later. I left. Several times, and each time for longer, I left until my own transience became constant. A circus coming through town. Tent up, tent down. I returned this El Nino year to a super bloom even Death Valley couldn't avoid. Life sprouted in verdant greens, goldenrods, and fuchsias, the slender phlox and desert parsley of the Antelope Valley, chia on the Carrizo Plain, and a pink chaparral current pouring through Placerita. On a map, the spots are an outbreak that resemble a backslash that mimics California's Cartesian tilt, left to right and downward, a floral fault line dividing coast and desert. Angelinos and tourists alike are careless and heavy-footed, trampling the foliage for a hashtag poppies picture above what is most seasons the ugliest lake in the state. Park rangers bemoan the off-path liberties taken. People pretend not to hear. Someone lands a helicopter in the valley because traffic. Why must we love things to death? Homogenization is a process of reduction. Through pressure, one thing is made small enough so as not to be noticed in the other. This is how I feel on streets once familiar, encroached upon, invisible, unkissable. From a beach overlooking newly strip-malled PCH, I avoid eye contact, hide from exes as surely as they would me. I determine not to turn if I hear by name, but nobody calls it. This next one's called Powdered Cows, presumably. My first favorite yellow was 5, a tartrazine dye mixed with plasticizer to form a prepackaged cheese dust. Savory in its synthetic anti-flavor, all parts not salt were distinctly carcinogen, delicious. For several years, cheese too was a thick brick of goldenrod, still laced with 5, but sometimes 6, a poor manzanato, 4x4-inch brick, 1 foot in length, shrink-wrapped in a waxy mint film, marked with a one-word blue label description, or sometimes not marked at all, and traded for a government voucher that came in the mail once a month, along with a talcum-like milk from presumably powdered cows. Father, a proud member of the wherever the Haliwensian tribe of Greater San Bernardino, lent no one his name, so Mom gave us her own with that'll show him vigor that I like to think burnt Papa in place wherever he was. It didn't. Her own father, having survived the depression on a chicken farm, told his daughters legends of held horses and unholdable cows, a varied consumption of a vast chicken amalgam that morphed any talk of the unmentionable animal into a bad word as sure as others were dreamlike intangible. Subsequently, conspicuous fromaging was seen as showing off. It was wealth you wanted people to take notice of. When Aunt Trudy won a few million in the Vegas penny slots, she bought a fancy home in the hills, and ever since all family functions have been held at her place. Second only to her own bodily enhancements, the cousins all received cars they soon couldn't afford to fix, and shrugged the tax bill altogether. Still, cheese's high place of privilege never left my Aunt Psyche. She makes platters of disproportionate cracker to cheese ratios and monitors our individual and collective intakes with a mental abacus of debits and credits, which she promptly reports to others in dark corners with guarded mouth. She tells anecdotes where familial character traits are reduced to varied signs of region and maturation, mold spores in the dark places they're born in, the acidic, the springy, the foe of paraffin over natural rind, pasteurization, the pecan and the persile, both in all manners of signifiers astringent or aromatic. If one goes the whole year without rectifying their account, she pretty much just shuts down the holidays altogether until somebody sends her a cheese wheel. A woman from the too much and many side of town married me, and we settled into an English Tudor-style nook beachside. She cooks elaborate meals with simple sophistication, the appreciation of which can only be learned by spoonful. Once for my birthday, she asked, like lovers sometimes do, "Of all the world, what can I make you?" "The whole world," I asked, knowing that she could do it too. "Mac and cheese," I said. "Tastes like home," I said, the echo of the foyer giving a little more weight to the words that I'm ever really comfortable with. She said about laying the special wedding china to the table. She noodles al dente by rote, shaves white cheddar, grades Gruyere, pours Emmentaler across the top with ease, and bakes. She serves up, and I fork through, only to find it too real cheese oily for my liking. The meld is overly stringy and resists the fork. I manufacture a smile and long for the fabricated smooth curves of synthetic youth, increasingly aware that neither extreme will suffice any longer. I have become something beyond the tartrazine, and yet find myself unprepared for the bacteria and potential pathogens of the organic, which should be cumulative, instead tastes binary. Perfect, I say. That one's accidentally turned into just being called the cheese piece, really, but yeah. This is going to be my last one. Thanks for listening tonight. This one's called An American Miracle. For a few years, my brother was drowning in predatory level interest on an old Ford Explorer we nicknamed the Exploder for its propensity to break down. That's when the blessing happened, or miracle, if you're so predisposed. This was somewhere too around when I had to serve his landlord papers over a plumbing dispute, and they couldn't bring my newborn nephew home from the hospital because the toilets overflowed through the living room and into the street while the owner was on vacation. My brother's lease had apparently rendered him incapable of making the executive decision of removing toilet detritus from the living room without prior approval. So off to the courts it was. Sheriff said they couldn't even find the landlord to serve him papers, but I found him on the first go. The guy chased me 3 blocks through town before I found a hiding spot in the same chili pepper restaurant we patronized for special occasions as a kid. Things were fraught, tenuous, but not in any spectacular way. Just another family of hardworking somnambulists in the new American fever dream. We were doing Sunday dinner at his apartment when we all decided it was too hot to cook and would pick up from the local taqueria instead. We took a verbal accounting and hopped in the Exploder. I was halfway into the seat already when I noticed the car fell somewhere on the dirty cleanliness spectrum that made me uncomfortable. It looked like somebody had spilled about a gallon of cranberry juice up and down the passenger seat. But while there may be some families where you can tell your relative that their car is simply too filthy or off-putting for you to ride in, ours isn't one. I'd be accused of big timing or being a college boy, whichever seemed worse at the time, and would be lucky if he didn't speed off. I plopped down out of familial obligation alone. I couldn't clearly see out of the windshield either without leaning a bit to the right or left due to damage directly in my line of sight. The thing is, though, being uncertain as to what the mystery juice was and whether or not it was even dry, I didn't really want to move at all. Nevertheless, the engine shot on, and in a few brief moments, we rolled on down the street while he relayed the story of the miracle to me, like I'm telling it to you. It had been a Friday, give or take, a day probably, and they were out at O'Hara's Pub at the Orange Circle, the central plaza of our town. It was Joel and Joseph and Carlos and Chris, and if I tried to tell you the particulars of the intersection of California where headbanger thrash metal and punk met cholo culture, you'd think I was crazy. But it's there. And for a lot of the old school punkers, it's sort of what happens when you age out of the crust punk phase. And if I were to sell you on what's beautiful about it, it would be the race dissolves, so intertwined our cultures here, primarily on account of the multiracial band that these Suey dudes are all emulating, suicidal tendencies, that is. But it's also correct to say that it's mainly a big old machismo testosterone hard-on, all fronting and projection that has a lot to do with rage and feeling maligned. But I don't know, maybe that's Southern California boys anyways. But that's what these guys, my brother and his friends, are like, and I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that. They were the kind of guys who would have been out looking for a thing if the thing came along, but always under the guise of someone giving or not giving respect. So they're hanging out at this bar when this guy comes up and befriends them. I can't tell you what he looked like because I wasn't there, but I was told he was like-minded enough to be a good little hangout, aside from how extra eager he was. So let's just assume some part, if not all of his head was shaved. He had a few too many tattoos creeping up the neck and down the limbs, and some combination of the Cali hardcore uniform, Pendleton, Dickies, solid colored t-shirt in white or black, most likely a bandana peeking out beside a wallet chain. And the way my brother told it to me, they spent a lot of their night just hanging like any other night, taking turns buying rounds, shooting pool, till the bar was closing and it was time to leave. Joel and his friend said, "Catch you later, stranger," whilst perhaps mentioning something about a next spot after party amongst themselves, when Straggler Man asked if he could tag along. And who knows why people know when to say no, or not now. But in short, my brother said he was all, "Sure, guy, but probably not this time because we don't really know you," just like that. "Then maybe next time we see you, on account of how otherwise pleasant it had all been, we could," and patted the guy on the shoulder. The guy was pretty chafed and sulked off the way I heard it, but it sounded like they were nice enough to me. A few minutes later, they're down just outside the Sunlight Youth parking lot where I was first saved by God in an old recycled movie theater. My brother and Carlos in the front seat of the Exploder, Joseph at the grill, smoking and drenched in late night headlight glow, while Chris was standing toward the passenger rear where he just finished a conversation with the girl who departed. All quick like eager Eddie comes back walking brisk through the parking lot, and before they could say so much as, "Come on, man, really?" he opened fire. Joseph was shot first in the knee and went down, and as if by floating, the guy was suddenly paused a few feet from the hood. He pointed the gun right at the driver's side of the windshield, and all my brother says next is two big white flashes froze him in place before he could even think to move. Couldn't even if he wanted. And like clockwork, the gunman points next towards the passenger, who is mid-scurry from the front seat to the back and was hit twice en route. The gunman took off running down the alley and into the dark, and my brother said it took a whole minute or so to realize he wasn't shot at all. He hopped out of the car quick once he defrosted and ran to Joseph on the ground in front, helped by Chris, who ran from the other side. They picked him up and carried him around to the passenger side back seat, opened the door to throw him in, but Carlos was already sprawled in back, halfway and on and off the seat, bleeding everywhere. They put Joseph in front instead, and Chris hopped in back to check on Carlos. And my brother hightailed it through 3/4 of the circle to point north at the fastest speed the shape could take, and straight on over to the closest hospital. For a day or so, the guys were in and out of surgery, and nobody knew what was what, but thankfully everyone turned out okay. Joe's knee would go on to heal, and Carlos, though incapacitated for longer, would turn out to be okay, but that's not the miracle. They found the guy too, in Hollywood, a couple of days later, and arrested him after a standoff situation that lasted a few hours. Big enough to make the news, but not so big as to interrupt your regularly scheduled programming. But getting him wasn't a blessing bit neither. My brother noticed in the days after a spot, 2 spots actually, where the bullets from the flashes he saw went straight into the car, 2 inches below the windshield. They apparently never came out anywhere, lodged themselves right into the engine block, presumably. And would you believe it? Fortunate though that was, it still wasn't the miraculous blessing either. The blessing, I mean, if you're really inclined to believe in such things, was the hepatitis. Apparently, Carlos had a rare strain, Carlos of the front seat that moved into the back, Carlos the only one shot inside the car, whose blood was everywhere and painted the inside upholsteries gray as maroon as the car's outside, Carlos. I couldn't tell you which strain, but let's say D, whatever that alphabetical delineation might indicate, because all I was told is rare, and people's business largely being their own and all, I didn't push. So in the days after the cops impounded the car, after the guys got out of the hospital, after the gunman was caught and charged and awaiting trial, after they were done with the investigation and the car was set to be released, if releasing was going to happen, my brother called the insurance company and they told him they'd have to total it. Apparently, despite the fact that the car was at least as drivable as it ever was, albeit with some cosmetic damage to the outside and a fair amount of interior cleaning to do, it wasn't worth what it would cost to insure it. From an insurance perspective, it was a liability nightmare. As they put it, a big old biochemical period hazard period, despite the fact that the virus supposedly couldn't live outside the body for more than 2 days. So you see, that's why the car that my brother couldn't afford to make his own payments on was declared totaled, and he was paid 10 whole grand for it. Then, because it was deemed such, they sold it back to him for $2,500, making it possible for him to pay off the remainder of his loan, buy his car back, and have just enough left over to buy us a family dinner. And if that's not a true-to-life American miracle, well, then maybe nothing is. By the time my brother finished telling me the truth of it all and assuring me that despite where I sat, the virus was indeed almost certainly, in all likelihood, most probably dead, give or take, we'd started on our way back from the taco shop. We decided to go through the circle at the center of town, even though it slowed you down a bit and the food was cooling. And as we hit the center, he cruised just slow enough for the Swiss cheesed exploder to be gawked at, just fast enough that the wind still blew your hair back a bit. We even took the innermost lane, whipping around a few extra times, just thinking about how sometimes life is good and good things happen to good people. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Brooke. It's great. Our next reader tonight is Caleb Braun. Caleb holds an MA in English from the University of North Texas and an MFA in poetry from the University of Washington, where he also received the Harold Taylor Prize. His poems have appeared or are forthcoming in the Crab Orchard Review, the Atlanta Review, the Columbia Review, Harper Pallet, Arcturus, and elsewhere. Caleb, please take over.
Thank you, Curtis. Can everybody hear me? You can hear?
Yeah.
Oh, good, good. Thank you, everybody, for coming and for reading. I'm going to read a couple short ones, then a long one, and then some medium ones, I guess. So let me, oh, sorry. I'm going to start my timer as well to make sure I don't go over, but I don't think I will. The first one, it was written in a creative writing pedagogy class, and we were just practicing one of my friend's activities that she gives to her undergraduate students. So I wrote it basically the whole thing in that class, which usually doesn't happen. So maybe it proves that creative writing classes are good and useful. But if it doesn't, then I'm sorry. It's called Self-Portrait. The telescope was so loud, I couldn't hear birds twittering in the winter trees, and the light was too quiet, delicate, evasive as a silver fish tiny in his busy creek. The light's reluctance made the telescope cast feverishly into the distance, farther than the age of man, farther than Pangea splitting across the earth, farther than the wisdom of the followers of Bethlehem's star, who gathered themselves before entering, who looked into one another's eyes and saw no longer sleep, no longer themselves, but light swaddled and babbling and worthy of praise. Okay, the second one is a sonnet, and it's called King Philip's Machine, and it's about the first automaton ever built, supposedly, like 500 years ago, commissioned by King Philip, but I think supposedly it was built by this watchmaker, maybe. We don't really know. Okay. The monk, a machine without words, his robes concealing a precise metal spirit, marches across the table, awe and fear reverberating from gears beneath his ribs. A few twists of the key-wound spring coils the monk into pretension of prayer, cold as wood, his cross burdened without care, meeting his lips in silent obsequies for the king, as though winding the mechanics of praise could repay God, as though we are ever saved by our creations. Philip lies in his grave, yet the monk still sets out to show the king's faith, each step, each kiss, each empty O to prove it, bound by the system that ordains his movement. Okay, so now on to the long one. It's a prose poem. It's a long prose poem. It's really the only real prose poem I've ever written. So it's called Elegy as Essay on Horses. Because I watch a woman in the parking lot of my rundown apartment on the plains for hours change a tire, I will do nothing for the rest of the day but think of horses. And because I have only seen a horse up close a few times and touched a horse's mane once, they seem the closest thing to truth I can dwell on. Doing not one thing for hours but watch as my head stampedes with horses, white horses, great, bulky, speedy brown horses, black horses that seem destined like death to cross into my field soon and chew me with their magnificent teeth. The hours run long. No horse enters my field. No horse trots down the road past this woman who is still in the lengthening Texas afternoon, wrenching a tire iron into her old white sedan, splotched in black where the paint has peeled. Because I am poor, a horse seems the surest thing to own. A group of wild roaming horses is called a band. A horse fitted with blinders is called a racehorse. After the racehorse has finished the race, everyone either claps or gets very sad and wonders what they will tell their wives. Either way, everyone gets drunk at a racetrack in my head, having never been to one. 11,000 to 13,000 years ago, all the horses died in North America or went elsewhere. New DNA evidence suggests domesticated horses introduced by the Spanish conquest that escaped and spread throughout the American Great Plains are genetically similar to the species that disappeared around 10,000 years ago. This says something about colonialism and categories. This interests me, but doesn't help me pay the bills or the woman change her tire. In fact, most of my time is spent earning no money and sitting in my chair. I can look up the names if you want. Mustang you've probably heard, and I don't know how to distinguish them. Clydesdales are tall and have white feathering on the lower legs, but they only remind me of beer commercials, and I'm not trying to sell you anything, though perhaps I should. The American paint is beautiful and splotchy and reminds me of clouds or this woman's car, and probably is the best horse for the movies. Point is, I'm thinking mostly about horses in the abstract, fitted with blinders, Emily Dickinson's Thundering Toward Eternity. My head's horses have very specific verbs. Like gods, they rumble up there, and I tremble, I yearn, I go nowhere. Last year, I sent a picture of sheriff's horses at the stockyards to a girlfriend in Seattle. There are brick roads and buildings built to look like the Old West when horses and carriages pulled by horses were the only way around. They really sold us on the whole thing, this being when my mom was still alive and wanted out of the house, even though it meant being pushed around in a wheelchair. To her, the horses were so tall and unbelievable then. She envied their legs and their appetites, and she appreciated with envy my legs and my appetites. When the check came at the stockyard barbecue joint, it was December. My parents paid the bill, so it was okay. And then she died, and I stopped speaking to the woman from Seattle, and I moved to Texas, and still people were fitting old cars with new wheels. Somewhere without fences, a horse is still wild. Somewhere there is another universe in which the woman and I are married, and my mom dances and holds with healthy arms our firstborn child, if certain theoretical physicists are to be believed. I wonder if it would make any difference to us if it were true, and how does one get paid to come up with such things? On his deathbed, Hardy cried out, "Eve, what is this?" though he had thought about it all his life. Are we to believe there is another Hardy, architect Hardy, Hardy who wrote no novels, having the money to devote his life to poems? I picture horse jockey Hardy winning the race, and according to some, he exists. Well, it all becomes quite meaningful, and yet saying so doesn't put a roof over one's head, as they say, and still this woman is twisting lug nuts into a donut to go somewhere presumably important. As he died, Socrates said, "So pay the debts and don't be careless." And there are many other stories like these. Where I falter is not what will I say or what did she last say, but here I am, October almost over, birds I don't bother to name chirp pleasantly in cool sun, a fly beats at the glass, and here she is not, no phone brightening with her name, no Texas sun through her window, no bird singing in the tight-knit seams of her tree, no one running her miles every day at sunset into the mountain valley parks to pray, no teeth, no smile up into me. What horses carry her across to the heaven she knew? No wheels can take me to her home over the lowlands and the hills. No home, only horses. When I think of horses, I think of them in the abstract, messengers of death, freedom, power. Like the Spanish invaders, I can only see one thing as a vehicle for another. Like this woman, I take a long time trying to replace what is lost with something that looks the same. Okay, good. The next poem is called The Invention of Irony. We're on to the medium, perhaps, length ones. When I first learned to spell it, I couldn't help but write my name everywhere. Caleb, it would say in marker on my wrist. Caleb, it would scream in green crayon on the dining room wallpaper flowers. Caleb, no one would read, etched into the wood of our bunk bed just behind my pillow. Like anyone young, I wanted to be disseminated like a dollar bill, wanted a small trochaic sound to be my signal, wanted to be contained as a symbol like those faces on the TV, small and strange in the center of attention. My parents didn't want this. "No, son, don't write there. Have some paper." It was never the same. At Sunday school soon after, I was told the story of Zechariah and still wanted now to be silenced and for no one to see me. In Texas, it was easy, the earth so hot and close you couldn't joke about being, but you could laugh inside your gut as Sarah did when she heard the Lord outside her tent giving news she thought might be true but couldn't believe. Still, the laugh formed like a spiral of stars inside her, or a bacteria splotch on a clear petri dish, or the bend of a river groaning and aching at the edge between what was and wasn't the river. I'd lie long afternoons like an iris on the black tarp of my childhood trampoline, thinking of Isaac, whose name means him laughing, as the Dallas summer sun was swallowed into dark relief. How I want to go back into that deep, hot place and stop trembling in the sunless memory. The glare of the future burns loudly, demands look away from what we would stake to ourselves to make ourselves new. How, like Isaac, we must carry the material that burns us. How I laugh too often knowing I can lay in the mouth of that fire some more reasonable sacrifice instead. Okay, another medium-ish one. It's called Volunteer Park Conservatory, which we would go to in Seattle on Capitol Hill when it was winter and they had a lot of plants and it was really warm inside. So it's nice to think about going somewhere public. Volunteer Park Conservatory. Oh, it's one of the rare rhymed poems too. Someone made a name for these in rows of pipe-fed boxes, ferns, flowers, trees, cultivated wilderness, vine gestures, dinosaur cycas in this room sequestered from history. Or was this history's form itself here? Thus, cultured clusters of cactuses, euphorbia brought near jungle sprouts, bird of paradise, bright red stems jutting out from deeper red. From pink pamphlets, I read the names for the natural, thought of what to call this place, both chaos and capture, preservation and disaster, these boxes of becoming, while outside winter rain numbing and clumps of hard-packed snow by streets with names I still don't know. Who cares? I wasn't born here, too poor to stay on Cap Hill. The fear, of course, is not dying, but the thought, born, formed, crushed, made us, growing just to fill these cages. Okay, this is another short one. It's called Syntax. Waiting at the station, we all revealed the name we had already given our firstborn children before we conceived them. We smiled at the thought of being sounds. Years later, I woke inside a train mostly empty. Outside, winter had overtaken while I was sleeping the long grass and distant mountains. And for a moment, I couldn't tell if I was the train moving over it or this earth, white, radiant, shameless, was pulling its silence over me. Okay, I have one last one, and this one was also written as a kind of activity or a prompt in a creative writing class, John's recently, so it's a recent poem. So that's another, hopefully this one proves that creative writing classes are useful, maybe more than the last one. And the title is Dear Nerdophile, What Are You Doing Dead? And my mom didn't keep any diaries really. She had prayer journals, but when I was cleaning out some stuff a couple weeks ago, I found this diary that had 4 entries in it. So she had 4 diary entries total, maybe for her whole life. And this was written in 1988, right after her sister was murdered. Dear Nerdophile, what are you doing dead? Are you still painting, all the blue gone silent? Does the old man speak to you like he won't for me? No matter, not our father. It's your voice I want to hear like water off the cool tip of a finger. Remember the helicopter ride above the forest in Pakistan? For weeks we thought we'd finally see as birds did. Flying, what a high, and yet what was it? We still saw them gliding below, beside, above, and we knew we were not like them. I fear, please tell me I'm wrong, that it's like that up there with those angels. I guess being a bird is about more than just wings, you said. Nerdophile, who else can I call that, or can call me that? We shared such strange emotions, the disappointment of a helicopter, the mute blue of a father. I guess having a sister is about more than just a body. What are you doing dead? A helicopter, like a bird, is about the air, the way a spoon is about a bowl and a mouth, the way a lock is a story about a key, but also what's behind it. Your door was locked, and you were what was hidden, and she and a knife are what found you. A knife is about revealing, releasing, cutting to the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is this, Caroline. I feel our lives are not about us at all. They lie silent and straight these days like chapel pews. They abandon our bridges as we speak. My newborn boy left me bloodless as a stone, and when he finally breathed, he was no longer blue. Nerdophile, the doctors say his heart might work just fine. Don't wait for him. I have never been so alive. But what are you doing, dead? Do you and those angels repeat our names until we return like an encore? Can you paint him up there, happy like those birds you scattered about an imaginary Pakistani castle, white, black, and a small blue shrinking into distance? An old dream, you said, revived years after, of flying more real than the flight itself. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Caleb. A Pakistani castle? That was, that's great. All right. Our last reader tonight is our wonderful new colleague, Dr. Noam Doer, assistant professor in the Department of English, author of the fantastic book, Love Drones, out of Saraban Books, 2019. His work has also appeared in Gulf Coast, Seneca Review, Passages North, as well as many other places. He's a former Fulbright scholar, received his MFA in creative writing from the University of Arizona, and his PhD in literature and creative writing from the University of Utah. So please welcome Noam Doer.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, great.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Curtis. Thank you, Jackie, Brooke, Caleb. It's really lovely to read alongside you, and it's lovely to be here as much as we can be anywhere. I was really tempted to read something new, but COVID stole my first book tour. And in the list of things that COVID stole from us, that's a pretty minor thing, but it's still a little bit of a missed opportunity. So I'm actually going to be reading from it rather than something new. This piece is, in some ways, it's the oldest piece, the first piece that I wrote before I even knew I was writing it for this book. And it was kind of a miracle child. It came out in one draft almost, and it hasn't changed that much from that first draft, which is incredibly unusual. Most other things that I've written require dozens, upwards of 100 drafts before they feel ready. So this one was truly unusual. If I was reading to you in person, I'd probably be singing to you, possibly passing around oranges, but as we are meeting over Zoom, I'm just going to have to share a PowerPoint presentation instead. So don't be alarmed as I take over your screens with this PowerPoint. Okay, and this is Wouldn't It? Let's see. Okay. And my 4-year-old hand stretches into the space between my parents' bed and the cold floor tiles. The contours of their bodies are still. My fingers want to close around the metal of the rifle. Every night, I wake up in the middle of the night, bend my body down, and look upside down under the bed to search for the silhouette. My cousin, on leave from his base, is cleaning his gun. I ask him what that stink is, and he says, "That is the sweet smell of gunpowder. You either love it or you hate it." My mind swings wildly between caring obsessively about the cleanliness of my boots and rifle and not caring at all. In the height of mania, I need to see my face reflected in my boot tips. There can't be a single grain of sand inside the barrel of my M16. It would be lovely and terrible to live in a world made of glass. Everything would be so fragile and transparent. We would refract all light and constantly make rainbows. And breaking one of us would mean perhaps breaking all of us. The rumor goes around that every Star of David stamped on the side of a handle grip is a kill. And because our guns are old rejects and have seen many wars, there are many stars stamped on the side. In the Israeli Defense Forces' easiest basic training, the military's future drivers, cooks, quartermasters, pencil pushers, mechanics, and yes, intelligence analysts line up for their first firing range. They ask the corporal in charge, what will happen if they get a bullseye with every shot? Will they be reassigned as elite snipers? The corporal orders the asthmatics, the flat-footed, the rejects, the confused, the bullies, and the nerds to shut up and give him 20. The first gun I ever own is a blue plastic water gun. I hold it upside down and pretend I'm ironing clothes. It would be lovely and terrible to live in a world made of leaves. Everything would be so soft and crunchy. If any of us hurt, we would all rush to cover. If any of us felt uncomfortable, we could simply sink into one another. We would be green until it was time to be red. We would be red until it was time to be brown. We would be brown until it was time to be dead. We would be dead until it was time to be green. My grandfather's Mauser is here somewhere. All of the grandchildren are looking for it. Where are the hidden cavities in his house? Behind a trap door in the shower ceiling is an old landline. A cable connected it to the underground explosives lab. I crawl through the hidden passage in his bedroom closet and into the bathroom. The grandchildren are searching for the gun. There are hollow spaces between the living room cabinets and the walls. The butt of an M16 is hollow and contains a sort of secret compartment. And because we received these guns as aid from the US government, and because they're so old, I make the joke that hidden inside are the finger bones of Viet Cong soldiers. Not many people find this funny. If I release the trigger right after I shoot, the rifle jams. If I take a breath, I can keep firing. It would be lovely and terrible to live in a world made of Lego. We would all fit together consistently. Every foot would have a perfect round anchor, and our faces would carry a permanent sickle smile. A soldier in my unit tells me how sexy it feels to fire a Glock at the firing range she takes her father to. In the next breath, she tells me how difficult it is to decide between asking him to buy her a new Volkswagen Beetle or a Peugeot 206. The soldier's frame fills the entirety of the bus seat. His head leans against the window. My long hair covers my adolescent face, and my knee hurts at the spot where it's pressed by the barrel of his rifle. The 1996 Lonely Planet Guide to Israel describes tourists being shocked when they see soldiers in civilian dress dancing in nightclubs with their M16s. The guide asks the reader to understand that the punishment for misplacing one's gun in the Israel Defense Forces is severe, and many soldiers choose to take the rifle with them rather than risk losing it. It would be lovely and terrible to live in a world made of gold. We would wonder if we were the outside wrappers of expensive chocolates. Our pillows would be bullions and would be off the hook for greed. I begged my dad to fire just one bullet. We're walking down the road at night, no one else is around, and he is the guard on duty. My head reaches his hip, and my steps try to keep in rhythm with his. He tells me that it's too dangerous, that the bullet could hit someone. I tell him to shoot it into the road, that way it won't hit anyone. He tells me it's late, and that the sound would wake up the entire kibbutz. I tell him to fire just one bullet, that's all. A friend who has never served tells me guns are not good or evil. People are good or evil. I tell him guns were made by people. During the first night of officer training, I look around and understand I'm not the same as everyone else. I lack ambition, I lack drive, I lack purpose. All the other future officers are intently cleaning their M16s, the parts spread before them on stretches of flannel fabric. My body makes a decision and I fall ill. In the morning, I drop out and return to my base. It would be lovely and terrible to live in a world made of stone. A single break would take millions of years of convection to undo. Perhaps then we would be more cautious with our actions. My father claims to have been able to strip, clean, and assemble an Uzi faster than anyone in his base, but he's never used one in combat. I'm heading back to the bus stop from the military recruitment base, where a doctor's committee has ruled me fit to serve in a non-combat capacity as soon as I turn 18. A soldier sees me walking toward the stop and calls out, "Achi," my brother. What's the time? I tell him and think to myself that the era in which I am a brother to other men has begun. It would be lovely and terrible to live in a world made of steam. How could we tell ourselves apart? Flesh and blood visitors would enjoy having their pores opened and their sinuses cleared. The barrel of the rifle is pointing toward the sky. I'm holding the charging handle back tight. If I let go, the bolt will spring into place, crushing the digits of the officer who is fingering the insides of my M16, searching for forgotten bullets. It would be lovely and terrible to live in a world made of milk. Our skin would be so soft before we turn sour. Guard duty and the rifle that comes with it is every 5 weeks. Close enough so I don't forget how to use it. Far enough apart so that I don't get used to it. It would be lovely and terrible to live in a world made of margins. Over there, the line. Over there, beyond the line. The lights of the West Bank settlement make the whole dark world look orange. I occasionally glance at the I'm guarding, but mostly I sink into my padded winter suit and read my book. A settler boy shows up and I pay him no mind, just tell him to stay away from the... He comes up to me and gyrating his hips, simulates fucking the barrel of my M16 with his 12-year-old crotch. It would be lovely and terrible to live in a world made of wheels. To be together would be, to be together would be, to be together would be precarious. They try to steal your arms, your rifle, that is, when you're asleep. So sleep with your gun under you. Grasp the strap in your hooked fingers. It would be lovely and terrible to live in a world made of cork. Enjoy it once on special occasions. It would be lovely and terrible to live in a world made of yarn. Beware the space cat. It would be lovely and terrible to live in a world made of matches. Intimacy would be cautious. The risks would be known. He tells me it's a hostile village down there. They all know it's just a matter of time before someone from over there will try to infiltrate the base, which is why we're on patrol. He tells me we should sit down and take a break, hide in the tool shed from the officers for a little while. Shouldn't we keep patrolling, I ask him? I thought he said it was a hostile village down there. Isn't it a matter of time before something happens? That's right, he says. It's just a matter of time. A 2-week assignment on this base means taking the 0200 to 0800 shift every night and watching the so-called hostile village as it wakes for another day of Ramadan. Sleepers are woken early by the sound of banging tins and fireworks so as to take their pre-dawn meal. The fireworks sound like gunshots, and I wonder, should I call it in or should I not? It would be lovely and terrible to live in a world made of clay. Dirt our eyes, dirt our ears, dirt our mouth. Thank you.
Wonderful. That was fantastic, Noam. Thank you so much. Let's see if I can change how we view this. Yes, here we all are. All right. It's kind of late, but does anyone have any questions? Anything you want to throw into the mix here for any of our readers?
I have a question. Oh,
Please, Jessica.
I can hear myself on Mike's computer. I have a question. I have a couple questions, but it is late, so I'll be brief. But for Noam, I was curious about, that was very moving and beautiful. Everyone's was beautiful. But the images and what you were reading and the way that the black screens, it felt to me they started to come like quicker and faster. And I started to feel kind of panicked every time one came up, which I think was a really powerful effect. And I was wondering, is this something that you do for readings, or is this the way that, do you put the text in conversation with these images in your book? And if you do, what's the proximity? Like, how do you decide? How do you arrange them?
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, that's a good question. The PowerPoint is just for the purposes of reading, but the I can show you on the screen. You can see hope that's close enough. Every passage that talks about a gun has like a gun part diagram attached to it. So I just created a PowerPoint of the gun parts corresponding to the pieces, and then the blank screens are for the "it would be lovely and terrible" lines, which appear without a diagram. And the order was designed with that in mind, that it would start. I think it actually follows like a kind of Fibonacci sequence in some ways, where it does get exponentially more present. So in the beginning, we do have more lag time between each "it'd be lovely and terrible" line until they kind of accumulate. And ideally stress out the reader, but also become more and more ridiculous with some of the possible worlds that this essay inhabits.
I definitely felt stressed out.
Yeah.
It was amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Others, any other questions? Jackie, you're muted.
Yes, I'm unmuting myself in case I have more dog barking. I have a question for Brooke, and the second piece that you read, in which you talked about the streets that you knew becoming more homogeneous. And that line, I think it appears maybe midway through the piece, but that line really, that sentence really stayed with me. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit briefly, if you remember, about the composition of that piece. So because that's a really nice anchor, that statement in the piece. So I'm wondering, where in the genesis of this piece did that anchor come in? You might even repeat that anchor if you can find it simply, because I really like it.
Thank you. Yeah, it comes towards the end of the piece. It's sort of like the last little refrain at the end. My initial instinct was not to put anything really about, this sort of more academic homogenization is this, and like defining it and then going back to it. But it's very much about place, and it's about California, where I'm from. And I had moved away for quite a few years. At this point, I guess about a decade. And so, of course, places change a lot. And I'm originally from Orange County, and most of Orange County is fairly homogenous anyways. But when I came back, a lot of the changes just seemed all the more so. So it was a little more stark to me. When I sort of stumbled on it, it just sort of made sense as the thing that anchored my idea of that place at that time. So there's also like a generic quality to that too, right? Like it erases personalities. So I'm not sure if that exactly answers, but hopefully.
Yeah, that does. It becomes an interesting dialogue with the synthetic cheese, as opposed to the pasture or the I can't remember how you describe the Gruyere and all of the other cheeses that are the antithesis of the powdered synthetic cheeses. So that might be, you might be aware of that already, if that sort of connection.
I'm sort of always accidentally talking about class and accidentally talking about authenticity and things like that. So I don't mean to, it just sort of keeps coming out.
Yeah, that's great.
Great.
Thank you.
I have a question for Caleb.
Caleb, you started sweating instantly as soon as you said that, John.
We didn't talk about this. You treated it as a poem. I didn't feel at the time I wanted to get into the veracity or the biography of what the poem was constituted of. But here, this is kind of a different setting. I'm just kind of curious, what kind of percentage from the diary is your own writing, and how do you negotiate that, like pulling stuff from another text that is personal and changing it to put a kind of artifice on it to say what you want to say? That's a kind of a big loaded question, but I don't know, just talk about that a little bit.
I think that is a good question, because it's like a big, I don't know, maybe a big problem of writing about somebody who's dead maybe is like you're speaking for them, especially if it's somebody that's close to you. The only thing I took from the diary was the first sentence, the title of the poem. Everything else is not from it. I mean, it is weird. It was weird to read it, obviously. And I mean, yeah. I mean, one question is like, would she want me to do this? I don't really know. I wonder if, I don't know. It doesn't feel totally to me like it's her voice anymore. I mean, it is written from that perspective, but the thing that set me off was partially, the kind of prompt that you gave us, which is based off of Victoria Chang's book. If anybody, the book Obit. So we had to include some random stuff in there, but. I mean, what set me off kind of was thinking about her relationship to her sister, who I never met because she died before I was born. But I have a couple of her paintings, because my aunt, the person that was murdered in the 1988, painted, and she was really the only one I knew of my mom's family that were did anything having to do with art. So I thought that was interesting. So I was really thinking about the paintings at first. And that's what I tried to incorporate. And then maybe the kind of like what happens at the end is kind of the myth, the family myth that we've had, that after my mom's sister died, the whole family was very depressed, including my mom. But then my brother was born very soon after that, which, according to the myth, is that's like made everybody happy and kind of forget the death. So that's obviously I don't think that's really exactly what happened. So that's kind of what I was trying to think about. I think I do, there's parts where I'm thinking about like, okay, so I'm kind of telling this little secret a little bit about, from my mom's thing that is not a public thing. So like, what can you do when you write about that to acknowledge it maybe? But like at other time, I mean, I wonder how many of our other poems do this when we don't even think about it, or we're speaking for other people, or speaking as an authority perhaps over something that we don't really have authority over. So I have been thinking about that. I don't know how much the poem addresses it, but I was thinking about it when I wrote it. I think Matt Rasmussen's book, called Black Aperture, has some poems that deal with that pretty well, like the one about recording he has this thing that it's like his brother who committed suicide, and he's like on the answering machine. He's like, call if you want to call me, call hell, or something like that. But at the end, it's like, I put my voice over yours, or something like that. So that is something I've been thinking about, but I don't know how well I address it in the poem. But yeah, I didn't include any language from the actual letter except the first sentence.
Thanks.
That makes me think about, a line from one of Jackie's poems, and I don't know if it was the last one or the penultimate one, but it was "The desert remembers the history of wind," right? And you think of, here we're talking about the personal, but in Jackie's case, she's talking about the natural world, and speaking for that, I think, is really interesting. And can the world speak for itself? I mean, sure, but at the same time, our responsibility to engage or open a door for this conversation. I don't know if Jackie, if you've got something you want to say about that or not.
Well, I agree with you, absolutely. I mean, we use words, our species uses language, but we also use silence. I'm not still muted, am I? No. So, that image or that moment does come from thinking about the way the landscape changes in the desert, because nothing is stable there. So in terms of speaking, I wasn't thinking about speaking for the wind, but I guess the only way I could address it is by looking at, well, it's not the only way, but I think a lot about animals and speaking for animals and perhaps for other sentient beings, including now we'd want to think about trees. I mean, that's the theme this year of the Humanities Center. And I have not yet done the reading about the trees, you know, the recommendation or the writing that's going on about the trees and the ways in which they communicate. And I was trying to tell some of this to my dad, talking about this. And and of course, if we leave trees untouched, their sense of measuring time is radically other than our sense of measuring time, because they live well beyond the time spans of human beings or of many mammals. So I don't think I'm answering the question, but I don't think I can answer that question, I'm afraid. I mean, I think you have a responsibility when you're writing about any other human being or any other creature or aspect of creation, and how to do that. You know, there are many ways, and we continue to find ways. But I think that silence, perhaps it is through also surrounding the silence, and not that there is only silence, because we recognize the wind when it's not there, right? Because that's when we recognize it. But other species, and I know spending a lot of time with horses, that horses, when it's windy, they're very keenly aware of what else they can hear in the wind. And I don't know what they can hear, you know, it will make them crazy. So, but I like the idea increasingly of poetry and of writing that surrounds silence. So I was intrigued by Noam's presentation and the way in which he used the screen as well, and the black space and the images and also the white space. So I'm not doing a good job of answering that question.
I don't know if it was a question. It was more, I mean, it may have been an observation of a relationship.
It's something
And
I think about a lot, though. I do, especially as more and more vanishes around us, and we need to preserve it. And how do we, you know, the fact that we have such an opportunity, or that we're able to decide so much, is disturbing, because our judgment is so, well, anyway, I don't want to get into all that, but yeah.
thank you, Jackie. And thank you all. I mean, all the readers tonight, it was fantastic. And, you know, we should do this again. But, you know, I mean, next time, I hope that we can do it in person. But for now, here we are. Thank you. Wish you all well. Take care. Be safe and be well. All right. Take care. Good night.